They called the valley dead, but Sergeant Ethan Walker could still hear it breathing. The sound came in waves through the cracked speakers of his combat helmet. The distant hiss of ruptured coolant lines, the low groan of cooling starship hulls, and somewhere beneath it all, the restless whisper of wind moving across miles of shattered metal. Ethan opened his eyes to a sky the color of burnt copper. For a long moment, he simply lay there on his back, staring upward as ash drifted through the air like gray snow. His suit diagnostics flickered weakly across the inside of his visor. Oxygen reserves, 31%. Power cells, critical. Squad status, unavailable. He already knew what that meant. Echo 9 was gone. The memory returned in fragments. The ambush. The electromagnetic storm. Alien interceptors dropping from the clouds without warning. Then impact. Ethan pushed himself upright, every muscle protesting. The battlefield stretched for miles across the barren moon of Karen 7. Pieces of destroyed transports littered the black, volcanic plain. One human dropship lay nearly half a mile away, its hull split open like a broken shell. Beyond it, the skeletal remains of alien walkers protruded from the dust at impossible angles. The war between Earth Coalition forces and the Dominion had officially ended 3 days ago. Somebody had apparently forgotten to tell Karen 7. Ethan removed his helmet to conserve power. Cold air immediately bit at his face. The moon's atmosphere was breathable, barely, but carried the metallic scent of scorched circuitry and mineral dust. He ran a gloved hand through sweat-damp brown hair and slowly rose to his feet. His left knee armor had cracked during the crash. Every step hurt. He checked his remaining supplies. 1 medical pack, half a canteen, a sidearm with 9 rounds. Not much for a man stranded nearly 200 miles from the nearest extraction zone. Still, Ethan had survived worse during his years as a combat medic. Barely. He began walking east, guided only by the emergency beacon displayed on his wrist monitor. The silence bothered him more than the pain. Battlefields were rarely truly quiet. There were always survivors. Calls for help. Movement. Hope. But Karen 7 felt abandoned. As though both armies had simply vanished and left their ghosts behind. Nearly an hour later, Ethan stopped. Something had changed. He couldn't explain it at first. Then he heard it. A sound so faint he almost dismissed it as wind. A slow, uneven breath. Ethan froze. Instinct immediately tightened every muscle in his body. He scanned the terrain ahead. Nothing moved among the wreckage except drifting dust. Then the sound came again. Breathing. Human? Alien? He couldn't tell. Against every survival instinct screaming at him to keep moving, Ethan changed direction and limped toward the source. The sound led him to the twisted remains of a massive alien strike craft half buried beneath volcanic ash. One fractured wing had collapsed against the ground. Ethan crouched beside the wreckage. Beneath layers of crushed metal and fractured armor plating, he saw something move. A hand, blue-skinned, barely moving, very much alive. Ethan dropped to one knee beside the collapsed section of the strike craft. Up close, the survivor looked even less likely to still be alive. The alien woman lay pinned beneath a fractured support beam nearly 8 feet long, its black alloy frame twisted from the crash. Frost clung to the edges of her shattered armor despite the warmth radiating from damaged systems nearby. Her skin glowed faintly beneath layers of dust, a deep sapphire blue unlike anything Ethan had ever seen outside military intelligence briefings. Silver-white hair spilled across the volcanic ash in tangled strands. One violet eye slowly opened. The moment it focused on him, Ethan saw recognition. Not relief. Not gratitude. Suspicion. Her hand moved weakly toward her side, searching for a weapon that was no longer there. Easy, Ethan said quietly, raising both hands. I am not here to hurt you. The universal translator mounted in his collar crackled as it processed the words. The woman's expression hardened instantly. Human, she whispered. Even exhausted, her voice carried authority. Leave this place. Ethan almost laughed. Trust me, that was already the plan. He crouched lower, examining the beam trapping her. The support spar had crushed part of her armored shoulder assembly, pinning her against the wreckage. Suit sensors embedded in his gloves displayed alarming readings. Internal injuries, severe dehydration, body temperature dropping. Without treatment, she would not survive another few hours. The logical choice was obvious. Keep walking. The war had taken enough from both sides. Coalition protocol specifically prohibited unauthorized contact with hostile command personnel. Besides, he barely had enough supplies to keep himself alive. The alien watched him carefully, reading the conflict on his face. You should go, she said. My people will return. Ethan looked around the empty battlefield. I have been hearing that promise from command for 3 days. For the first time, something changed in her expression. Confusion, perhaps. Or curiosity. Ethan reached into his medical pack. The alien immediately tensed. Do not touch me. You are in no position to negotiate, Ethan replied, removing a trauma scanner. Besides, I was a medic before I became stranded on this miserable moon. I am your enemy. Ethan activated the scanner anyway. Blue light swept across her body. Today you are a patient. She stared at him silently. The scanner finished its assessment with an unpleasant tone. Ethan exhaled slowly. Worse than he thought. Well, he muttered. That could have gone better. He set his pack down and moved toward the beam. This is going to hurt. Human. Her voice stopped him. Why? Ethan looked up. Why what? Why save me? Wind swept across the wreckage, carrying ash between them. Ethan considered the question. In truth, he did not know. Maybe because he had spent too many years watching people die. Maybe because Echo 9 was gone, and leaving someone behind felt unbearable now. Or maybe because beneath the armor and insignia, she looked less like an enemy and more like someone who had simply run out of luck. He shrugged. Because you are still breathing. Before she could respond, Ethan braced himself against the fractured spar and began to lift. Ethan planted both boots against the fractured hull and pushed. The damaged support beam resisted at first, groaning as metal scraped against metal. Warning icons immediately flooded the corner of his visor. Structural instability detected. Collapse risk, high. Wonderful, Ethan muttered through clenched teeth. Exactly how I wanted to spend my afternoon. The alien woman watched him in silence. Even injured and half buried beneath wreckage, she carried herself with remarkable composure. Most soldiers Ethan had treated on the battlefield looked terrified when death stood this close. She looked annoyed. With one final effort, Ethan shifted the beam several inches. It was enough. Move, he said. The alien hesitated. Pride, Ethan realized. She did not want help. Unfortunately, pride weighed considerably less than starship debris. Ethan reached down, carefully supporting her as she pulled herself free from beneath the twisted metal. The moment she was clear, her legs failed. Ethan caught her before she struck the ground. For an instant, surprise flashed across her violet eyes. Then the walls immediately returned. Release me, she said coldly. Not happening. Ethan guided her down against a relatively stable section of wreckage and opened his medical kit. The portable scanner had not exaggerated. Several fractures. Significant blood loss. Severe exhaustion. Worse, fragments from her damaged armor had embedded themselves throughout the suit's inner layers. Nothing immediately fatal, but without treatment, she would not survive the night. The alien observed every movement as Ethan prepared a field stabilizer. You possess medical training uncommon for infantry. Combat medic, Ethan said while activating a sterile spray. Spent 10 years patching up people who made questionable life choices. And now, Ethan paused. Now I mostly make them myself. Something almost resembling amusement touched the corner of her mouth before disappearing. Ethan noticed but pretended not to. He carefully sealed the damaged sections of her armor with emergency polymer foam. The material hardened instantly, reducing pressure on the worst injuries. She never cried out, never flinched. She simply endured in complete silence. That bothered Ethan more than pain ever had. When he finished, he handed her his canteen. She stared at it. You require hydration, he said. So do you, she replied. Probably, but I can complain about it longer. After several seconds, she accepted the canteen and took a small drink. You continue to diminish your own survival probability, she said quietly. Ethan shrugged. Occupational hazard. A sudden tone echoed through the battlefield. Both froze. Ethan immediately lowered himself beside the wreckage, instinct taking over. The sound repeated several seconds later. Mechanical. Rhythmic. Searching. His suit sensors confirmed his fear. Unidentified aerial drones approaching from the north. Distance, 2 miles and closing. The alien's expression changed for the first time since he had found her. Not fear exactly. Concern. You must leave immediately, she said. Those drones are not coalition. Ethan glanced toward the dark horizon where distant shapes moved against the copper sky. Friend of yours? Her silence answered the question. That bad, he asked. She looked directly at him. Human, if they discover you beside me, they will assume the worst. Ethan looked at the approaching signatures, then back at the injured woman sitting against the wreckage. He should leave. Every instinct agreed. Instead, he closed the medical kit, slung it over his shoulder, and crouched beside her. Can you walk? She attempted to stand. After one step, she nearly collapsed again. Ethan sighed softly. Yeah, that is what I thought. Without another word, he carefully lifted her into his arms. For the second time that day, the alien looked genuinely shocked. What are you doing? She demanded. Ethan adjusted his grip and started walking toward a distant line of black cliffs. Saving both of us from your friends. Ethan moved across the volcanic plain as quickly as his damaged knee allowed, each step sending fresh pain through his leg. The alien woman remained silent in his arms, though he could feel the tension in her body every time the distant drone signatures pulsed across the battlefield. Above them, dark clouds rolled across the copper sky, swallowing what little daylight remained. The wind had grown stronger, carrying ash and fine black dust that rattled against Ethan's damaged armor like dry rain. There is an abandoned relay station inside those cliffs, the woman finally said, her voice weaker now. 2.3 miles east. Ethan adjusted his grip. You suddenly seem very interested in helping. I am interested in not dying. Fair enough. They continued in silence. Despite her injuries, the alien remained remarkably alert. Several times, she warned him about unstable ground or concealed debris long before his suit sensors detected them. Ethan began to suspect that she possessed military training far beyond that of an ordinary officer. She noticed everything. Distances, terrain, wind direction, escape routes. After nearly 40 minutes, Ethan's breathing became heavier. His oxygen reserves had fallen below 20%, and the weight he carried was beginning to wear him down. The alien studied him carefully. You are exhausted. I noticed. Put me down. You will not survive otherwise. Ethan shook his head. Not happening. Human stubbornness is apparently not exaggerated in your military records. Ethan glanced down at her. You have read human military records? She immediately looked away. General briefings only. Ethan filed the answer away. Another mystery. The cliffs finally rose before them, towering nearly 300 feet above the barren plain. Hidden between two massive stone formations stood the remains of an old communications relay. Most of the structure had collapsed long ago, but portions of the lower bunker remained intact. Ethan carried her inside just as the first search drones passed overhead. The bunker smelled of dust, cold stone, and ancient machinery. Emergency lights still glowed faintly along one corridor, powered by some forgotten backup system. Ethan gently lowered the alien onto a damaged equipment platform and immediately moved toward the sealed entrance. Using a portable field emitter from his medical kit, he masked the bunker entrance with thermal interference. It was a temporary solution at best. That will not stop them for long, the woman said quietly. Ethan sat heavily against the wall opposite her. Long enough is all I need. For several minutes neither spoke. The only sounds were the distant howl of wind outside and the soft hum of failing machines. Finally, the alien broke the silence. What is your name, human? Ethan looked up, slightly surprised. Ethan Walker. Sergeant. Formerly. She nodded slowly. I am Vealora. Ethan smiled faintly. Just Vealora? For the first time since they had met, something warm touched her expression. For now, Ethan accepted the answer. Soldiers often hid pieces of themselves during war. He understood that better than most. He opened his pack and removed the final military ration bar. Without hesitation, he broke it in half and handed one piece to her. Vealora stared at it. This is your last meal. Ethan leaned back against the cold wall. Then I guess we both eat light tonight. Vealora accepted the ration slowly, her violet eyes fixed on him with an expression Ethan could not quite understand. Outside, somewhere beyond the cliffs, engines echoed through the darkening sky. The engines outside did not fade. They multiplied. Ethan remained seated against the bunker wall, listening as distant vibrations rolled through the stone beneath them. Whatever was moving across Karen, 7 was not a small search party. Entire sections of dust drifted from the ceiling with each passing minute. Vealora sat motionless on the equipment platform, half of the ration bar still untouched in her hand. Her attention remained fixed on the bunker entrance. "Those are not standard reconnaissance craft," she said quietly. Ethan looked up. "You recognize them?" She hesitated. "Yes." "Friendly." Vealora did not answer immediately. "That depends on whether they find us." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I am starting to notice that nobody on this moon likes simple answers." He pushed himself to his feet and limped toward an inactive console near the center of the bunker. The relay station might have been abandoned for decades, but military engineers shared one universal trait across every species. They built systems to survive disasters. After several minutes of rewiring damaged power conduits with spare medical cables, the ancient console suddenly flickered to life. Dim holographic screens illuminated the bunker with pale blue light. "Come on," Ethan muttered. "Do not fail me now." Static filled the speakers before a fragmented topographical map appeared. Ethan studied it carefully. The bunker sat inside a narrow canyon system stretching nearly 15 miles through the mountains. Unfortunately, several energy signatures were now converging on the region. "That cannot be good," Ethan said softly. Vealora had quietly moved beside him. Even injured, she carried herself with unmistakable discipline. Her eyes scanned the tactical display with astonishing speed. "They are sweeping sector by sector," she said. Systematically. Ethan glanced sideways. "You sound very certain." Military doctrine is often predictable. Ethan studied her for a moment. There was something she was not saying. Quite a lot, actually. He decided not to push. "Not yet." The console suddenly emitted another warning tone. "Atmospheric disturbance detected. Severe magnetic storm approaching. Estimated arrival, 23 minutes. Ethan almost laughed. Of course there is a storm. Why not? Vealora looked genuinely confused. You find this amusing? No. If I stop joking, I start worrying. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Then, unexpectedly, she said, "Humans are strange." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is probably fair." Together they reinforced the bunker as best they could. Ethan sealed fractured door panels using emergency foam while Vealora directed him toward structurally stable sections of the facility. Despite her injuries, she seemed intimately familiar with military infrastructure. More than once she identified hidden emergency systems buried behind collapsed walls. By the time the first wind struck the mountain pass, the bunker felt almost secure. Almost. The storm arrived like a living thing. Wind screamed through the canyon at nearly 100 miles per hour. The entire structure shuddered. Emergency lights flickered repeatedly. Outside, visibility vanished beneath walls of ash and electrical discharges that painted the darkness violet. Ethan sat beside the entrance, pulse pistol resting across his knees. Vealora remained nearby, watching the storm through a narrow observation slit. "You should rest," she said. Ethan shook his head. "Old habit. Medics usually sleep last." Vealora lowered her gaze. "Your people abandoned you." Ethan looked into the darkness beyond the bunker. "Probably. Yet you still chose compassion." Ethan considered the question. "War ends," he said quietly. "People still have to live afterward." Vealora said nothing. But in the soft blue glow of the failing emergency lights, something in her expression changed. Outside, hidden beyond the storm, dozens of engines continued searching. The storm raged through the night. Ethan lost track of time sometime after the emergency lights dimmed to half power. The old relay station groaned constantly around them, ancient metal protesting each blast of wind that slammed against the mountainside. Fine dust drifted from overhead beams, coating every surface in gray ash. Ethan remained awake beside the entrance, though exhaustion pressed heavily against him. His damaged suit had finally shut down most non-essential systems to conserve power. The temperature inside the bunker steadily dropped. Across the room, Vealora sat with her back against the wall, silver hair illuminated by the faint blue glow of the emergency console. She appeared calm, but Ethan had noticed something. Every few minutes, her breathing became uneven. The field treatment had stabilized her injuries, but it had not healed them. Eventually, Ethan stood and crossed the room. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. Veolora looked up. I have endured worse. Ethan folded his arms. That was not an answer. She held his gaze for several seconds before finally speaking. My internal armor regulator was damaged during the crash. My body temperature is falling. Ethan frowned. The environment inside the bunker had dropped to barely 40 degrees Fahrenheit. For a healthy soldier, uncomfortable. For someone severely injured, dangerous. Ethan searched through his nearly empty medical kit one last time. Nothing useful remained. Then he looked toward the dormant relay generators lining the far wall. Maybe not completely out of options, he muttered. Nearly 20 minutes later, Ethan succeeded in rerouting residual power from the emergency systems into one functioning thermal unit. The ancient machine sputtered, sparked once, and finally released a weak stream of warm air. It was not much, but the temperature inside the bunker slowly began to rise. Veolora watched the entire process in silence. You repaired it without schematics, she observed. Ethan sat down beside the heater, wiping grease from his hands. Growing up on a farming colony teaches you things. If you cannot fix equipment yourself, you usually go without. Veolora lowered her eyes. Your people value self-reliance. Ethan smiled faintly. Sometimes too much. Silence settled between them once more. Outside, lightning flashed beyond the bunker entrance, briefly illuminating the room in silver light. Finally, Veolora spoke. You said you were a medic. Why did you leave military service? Ethan stared at the floor for a long moment. My squad was trapped during an evacuation on Vega Station. Command ordered us to withdraw. He paused. There were civilians still inside. Veolora listened quietly. I stayed. Ethan shrugged. The civilians got out. My career did not. Another flash of light crossed the bunker. Veolora studied him carefully. You sacrificed your future for strangers. Ethan gave a tired laugh. I lost some paperwork and a uniform. Plenty of people lost much more. Veolora looked away, but not before Ethan noticed something unfamiliar in her expression. Respect. The ancient console suddenly emitted a sharp warning tone. Both soldiers immediately became alert. Ethan limped toward the display. New readings had appeared across the tactical map. The storm was weakening. More troubling, dozens of unidentified signals now surrounded the canyon. Ethan's stomach tightened. That is a lot of search teams. Veolora slowly rose to her feet despite obvious pain. Her expression had changed completely. The warmth from earlier vanished, replaced by cold military focus. They have found us, she said softly. Ethan checked his pulse pistol. 9 rounds remained. Against an entire search force, it would not matter. He looked toward Veolora. Any suggestions? For the first time since they had met, Veolora looked genuinely troubled. Yes, she said quietly. When they arrive, you must let me speak first. The storm finally broke just before dawn. Silence settled over the canyon with unsettling suddenness. No wind, no thunder, no screaming metal. Only the low hum of the ancient relay station and the distant sound of engines. Many engines. Ethan stood beside the bunker entrance, staring at the tactical display projected across his wrist monitor. The canyon was completely surrounded. At least 40 separate signatures had established positions throughout the surrounding ridges. More continued arriving every minute. That is not a rescue operation, Ethan said quietly. Veolora stood several feet behind him, one hand pressed against her injured side. Even weakened, she somehow looked taller than before. More commanding. No, she said softly. It is not. Ethan checked his pulse pistol one final time before holstering it. 9 rounds. Against whatever force waited outside, the weapon was little more than decoration. He noticed Veolora watching him. You said I should let you speak first, he said. Care to explain why? Veolora remained silent for several seconds. Because if you speak first, they may not listen. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That is encouraging. Before Veolora could answer, every light inside the bunker suddenly went dark. Total silence followed. Then a deep mechanical voice echoed through hidden speakers somewhere within the old relay station. The translation software struggled briefly before resolving. Occupants of the relay facility. Exit immediately. Ethan exchanged a look with Veolora. Well, he said quietly. That sounds official. The voice returned. You have 30 seconds. Ethan looked toward the entrance. Pale morning light filtered through the dust outside. He could see movement now. Tall figures positioned across the canyon floor. Motionless. Waiting. Those are your people? He asked. Veolora slowly nodded. Yes. Ethan studied her expression. For the first time since meeting her, he saw something unexpected. Fear. Not for herself. For him. Ethan, she said quietly. Whatever happens outside, do not interpret their actions as hostility. Ethan laughed softly. You realize that sentence usually means the exact opposite. She almost smiled. Almost. Please, she said. Trust me. Ethan stared at her for a long moment before finally nodding. Together they stepped outside. The sight waiting beyond the bunker stopped Ethan cold. The canyon floor had become an army. Hundreds of armored soldiers stood in perfect formation beneath the towering black cliffs. Their armor was unlike anything Ethan had seen during the war. Matte black, plating trimmed in silver. No banners. No insignia. No visible rank markings. Every soldier carried identical weapons held across their chests in absolute synchronization. Above them hovered enormous warships, their dark hulls nearly blotting out the morning sky. Ethan had seen recordings of fleets like this during intelligence briefings. There had only ever been one force in the galaxy that deployed in complete silence. One force both the Coalition and the Dominion feared equally. The Death Legion. Ethan suddenly understood why Veolora had been afraid. At the center of the formation stood a single officer wearing polished obsidian armor. As Ethan and Veolora emerged from the bunker, the officer stepped forward. The entire canyon seemed to hold its breath. Ethan instinctively shifted slightly in front of Veolora. Injured or not, she was still his patient. The officer's helmet concealed all facial features, but the voice that emerged carried unmistakable emotion. My commander, the figure said, dropping immediately to one knee. A heartbeat later, every soldier in the canyon knelt as one. For several seconds, Ethan could not move. Hundreds of soldiers remained kneeling across the canyon floor, their heads lowered toward the woman standing beside him. Even the massive warships overhead had gone silent. No engines, no communications, only stillness. Ethan slowly turned toward Veolora. She stood perfectly straight despite her injuries, silver hair moving gently in the cold morning wind. The uncertainty he had seen inside the bunker was gone. In its place stood something ancient and unshakable. Authority. Commander, Ethan repeated quietly. Veolora closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again. I had hoped to explain later, she said softly. Ethan stared at her. You think? The officer kneeling at the front of the formation finally raised their head. Commander Veolora Nix, the officer said, voice trembling slightly. The Death Legion has searched for you continuously for 72 hours. We feared. The officer stopped. Veolora stepped forward. I am alive, Commander Redhan. That is sufficient. Yes, my commander. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Veolora Nix. He knew that name. Every Coalition soldier knew that name. The commander of the Death Legion. The strategist responsible for ending 3 separate planetary wars. The woman military analyst described as brilliant, relentless, and utterly impossible to capture. Ethan slowly looked back at the woman he had carried across the battlefield. The woman who had shared his last ration bar. The woman he had repaired with medical foam inside an abandoned bunker. You command the Death Legion, he said quietly. Veolora met his gaze. I do. Ethan laughed softly, mostly because the alternative was collapsing from shock. Of course you do. A sudden movement rippled through the formation. Several soldiers had noticed Ethan standing beside their commander. Their weapons remained lowered, but tension spread immediately. Commander Redhan rose to one knee. My commander, he said carefully. The humans should be separated until proper security protocols are established. Ethan noticed dozens of helmet visors shift toward him. The atmosphere changed instantly. Veolora noticed it as well. Before anyone could move, she took one step forward. No. The single word echoed across the canyon. Absolute silence followed. Veolora's violet eyes swept across her assembled legion. Sergeant Ethan Walker is under my direct protection. No one moved. No one spoke. Commander Redhan lowered his head immediately. As you command. Ethan looked at Veolora in surprise. You do not have to do that. Veolora turned toward him. Yes, she said simply. I do. She faced her legion once more. This human found me beneath the wreckage. He treated my injuries. He carried me across Karen 7 while every survival calculation argued against it. He shared his final food. He expected nothing in return. Her voice remained calm, yet every soldier listened as though the stars themselves had begun speaking. You were all taught that strength defines warriors, Veolora continued. You were wrong. She looked directly at Ethan. Strength is choosing compassion when fear would be easier. Across the canyon, soldiers who had never lowered their heads before now bowed them once more. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. You really did not need to make a speech. For the first time since they had met, Veolora openly smiled. It transformed her entire face. Human, she said quietly. You carried me nearly 3 miles through a battlefield. I believe a speech is the minimum acceptable response. The Death Legion remained on Karen, 7 for another 6 hours. Medical teams arrived almost immediately, surrounding Veolora with equipment so advanced that Ethan barely recognized half of it. Despite repeated assurances that she would recover fully, the commander refused evacuation until Ethan had received treatment first. It was, according to Commander Red Han, an unprecedented order. Ethan sat on the lowered ramp of a Legion shuttle while a silver medical drone repaired the damage to his knee armor. Across the landing zone, thousands of black-armored soldiers moved with astonishing precision, preparing for departure. Massive transports rose silently into the sky one after another, disappearing through the clouds without a sound. Your people are efficient, Ethan said as Veolora approached. She had exchanged her damaged armor for a formal black uniform trimmed in silver. Even without rank insignia, authority seemed to follow her like gravity. Efficiency keeps soldiers alive, she replied. Ethan nodded. Guess we could learn something from that. For a moment, neither spoke. The battlefield around them looked smaller now, less frightening. Morning sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days, reflecting across fields of black glass and shattered metal. A coalition rescue ship entered orbit 2 hours ago, Veolora said quietly. Your government has finally remembered you. Ethan smiled. Better late than never. Veolora looked toward the horizon. There will be questions. There usually are. You may tell them whatever you wish. Ethan considered that. He could return home and tell military intelligence that he had spent 3 days stranded with the most feared commander in known space. He could describe the hidden bunker, the shared ration bar, the conversations in the dark. He could tell them that the legendary Commander Veolora Nyx worried more about one injured human than about an entire fleet searching for her. Somehow, he doubted anyone would believe him. I think I will keep most of it to myself, he said finally. Veolora studied him carefully. Why? Ethan looked out across the canyon. Because some things belong to the people who live them. For several seconds, Veolora said nothing. Then she removed a small object from her uniform. It was a polished silver insignia shaped like a star surrounded by 6 wings. Among my people, she said softly. This is awarded only to those who have carried a Legion soldier from certain death. Ethan accepted it carefully. The metal felt unexpectedly warm. How many humans have one of these? Veolora's expression softened. You are the first. A transport descended nearby, its engines humming softly. Commander Redhan waited beside the boarding ramp. It was time. Ethan stood slowly. Take care of yourself, Commander. Veolora looked directly into his eyes. You as well, Sergeant Walker. Ethan extended his hand. After the briefest hesitation, Veolora accepted it. No speeches followed. No grand promises. Just a simple gesture between 2 soldiers who had once been enemies and had chosen something else instead. As Ethan boarded the Coalition rescue shuttle, he looked back one final time. Thousands of Legion soldiers stood in silent formation. And at their center, beneath the endless alien sky, Veolora raised one hand in farewell. Years later, whenever Ethan was asked what truly made humans special, he never mentioned strength, courage, or war. He simply remembered a cold bunker, half of a ration bar, and the moment an entire army learned that mercy could be stronger than fear.